The existence of Bob Lavaggi is perishable art. It lasts longer than a head of cabbage or the telling of a story. The recipe for cabbage soup, stories retold, songs replayed, sculpture and architecture, may not perish for centuries, depending on their usefulness to future generations. Therein, we endeavor to invent stories and artifacts that might be useful to others now and later. Except for the briefest point between the future and the past, it's all in our imagination. Blanche was my mother. The role models that she gave me were Jonas Salk, who cured polio, and Albert Einstein, who split the atom. Babcha gave me Beethoven. My dad's mom gave me Louis Pasteur, who pasteurized milk. My dad's list included Karl Marx, who empowered the workers, and Thomas Jefferson, who gave us free speech. If I aspired to the purposes of these men, I would be in good standing with the people who fed and sheltered me. Out in the street, my Irish-Italian friends had their own set of heroes. When they spoke of saints, I consoled myself with the fact that I had my own list of heroes who were equally important. There was one man who I needed clarification on. It was a gray afternoon between the end of school and dinner. A few of us were leaning on our scooters, hoping that someone would get an idea for a game. Tony mentioned something about, "He's watching us all the time." "Who's watching?" I asked. "God," Tony replied. "Where is he?" "He's all around us all the time." It was late enough for me to go without appearing sissy, so I set my scooter towards home and gave myself a shove that lasted all the way into my alley, with both feet on the scooter. That was as tough as I could get. My mother was cutting carrots for chicken soup. Tony told me about God who's all around us. My mother stopped what she was doing and sat next to me. There are lots of people who believe in God, but we don't. I don't. Dad doesn't. Babch and Jadek don't. Nana doesn't. And Grandpa didn't. But many people do. Don't tell people there is no God. Just know what you believe. I believed my mother. She was the one feeding and sheltering me. Babcia, my mother's mother, was an orphan in Poland. At 12, she was employed by a wealthy Warsaw family who had a library in their house. According to my mother, Babcia spent all of her free time reading, and by the time she left Poland, she was well acquainted with Copernicus, Newton, and Galileo. Babcia and I climbed the stairs to my bedroom at the beginning of a one-week Christmas vacation, full of presents that I already opened. I was feeling lonely sitting on the bed. "Babcia, will you stay a while?" "Okay," she said, "but you have to get used to staying alone." I climbed between the crisp sheets and my body trembled. "Someday I will die." "Why?" I asked. "Because someday everybody dies." I knew this was true. Babes in Toyland kept going around in my head, like angels singing outside the window. Now I was waiting for her to leave. I wanted her to leave.
As soon as the door clicked, shovelfuls of ink poured out of my eyes. I buried my head under the pillow so no one would hear me cry. The mattress, while my face was soaked. But I was warm. I realized that I was okay and would be fine without Babsha. Then I cried at how easily I let go of her. Someday I would let go of all the people that I spent the day with. Then I cried until I fell asleep. Jadek was my mom's dad. He was a potato farmer in Poland. He built Babsha's house by himself, and he survived 3 colon cancer operations in 1935, making him the star patient at Meadowbrook Hospital. At 5 years old, I spoke more English than Jadek, so we didn't talk much. But he was my mentor, and I closely followed his Polish craftiness. Once after dinner, he repaired his work shoes. His jaw muscles bulged as his bulky fingers pushed the needle through the old brown leather. Stitch by stitch, the shoes mended. Before each stitch, he leaned forward so I could see the care that he took placing his needle. I was transfixed by the finesse that he brought to his smelly boots. In 1944, my mother was working on an assembly line riveting sheet metal to fighter planes for World War II. It so happened that my dad, René, also worked at the Thunderbolt factory. This was my mother's passage to my father's world. According to my mom, my dad's family was as fortunate as hers was not. Nana, my dad's mother, was born in Italy and adopted by her Aunt Penelope and Uncle Augusto, who lived in Paris. Her bedroom was a large bay window that faced the street. Being an only child, her life was charmed with Parisian adventure. Often on Sunday afternoon, she would go to pick up a roast chicken from the bakery. She loved smelling the rosemary as she carried the warm package in the Paris twilight. In those days, people did not roast in their flats. Uncle Augusto took her to openings of the annual art exhibitions. Villard, Monet, Cézanne, Renoir were all in the air while chestnuts roasted in the street. On Christmas Eve after church, they would go to the bistro for onion stew. She and her friend walked together each day to their lessons at the school for dressmaking. Each morning, they passed a man walking the opposite direction. They teased each other as he gawked from across the street. According to Nana, one morning he crossed the street. They both turned to study the fittings in the hardware store window. The tall man addressed Michaela. "Good morning," he said seriously. "I would like to marry you." "I have to ask my uncle," she said. They got married, Grandpa left for America, and Michaela continued studying dressmaking. Grandpa Ugo was a stone carver and worked in the same marble shop as Augusto in Paris. It was at a shop party where he fancied Michaela, and so began his endeavor to court. His career began in Carrara, Italy, as an apprentice carver in a quarry. For years, he walked 2 hours to work and earned a bowl of soup. But his endeavors led him to Florence, Paris, and New York. According to Nana, she was nervous when she arrived in New York about how things would turn out in a strange country with a new husband. At immigration, there was a gate that all passengers had to stand behind. Ugo reached across and lifted her over the gate. The city was at their fingertips. Years later, she told Ugo, "As long as I have dinner on the table every night, if I sew for customers during the day, it's none of your business." She was a custom seamstress and supported herself for 25 years after Ugo died. My father, Rene, learned to carve from his father and continued carving after Ugo died. That was the way things stood when I started wondering how things would turn out for me.
A few things were fun and came easy. I loved making drawings that made my mother proud. As time went on, the things I made seemed to be admired by others, and I liked it.
A bird in the wind lofts the air. The cricket is on the twig. All in the twilight of August, a spider is weaving her web. Clouds from the west block the sun. Thunderheads rattle the hills. A cold rain is drenching the valley. The meadow is bowing its head. The wind blows, then rustles the trees. It turns and it tumbles the weeds. The spider web bends from the wind. A bird sings a splendid reply.
In the 6th grade, Brickman called from his desk. "Lavaggi, it's time to clean up." After closing the paint jars, I headed for the door. "Sutherland, help Lavaggi clean his brushes," Brickman directed. I let the door close behind me, so the rest of the class would not see me being polite to Mary Sutherland. I head down the hall towards the slop sink, listening for the door to open. When it does, there's commotion in the room. "Quiet down!" Brickman's voice is stern. The door slams, and we are alone in the hall. Mary is standing still with her head tilted. "I'm supposed to help you wash your brushes," she says, as if it were a punishment that she did not deserve. "All right," I say. We walk down, and I open the single door to the slop sink closet. Now Mary is standing next to me. She slides a brush out of the tin can. Her fingers are covered with paint. I step in and turn the hot water on. She steps in on my left and holds her brush under the steaming water so it won't burn her fingers. I step back for a dirty brush in the can. Her socks are loose and low, showing her ankles. She rubs the brush bristles against the side of the slop sink. Steam pours out of the doors, and her fine hair is beginning to mat. There is no trace of pigment left on either brush, yet we rub them cleaner. Our elbows knock together. Reaching for 2 dirty brushes, I feel the chill from the hall air through my damp clothes. Mary takes a dirty brush and hands me the clean one. Once again, we're rubbing dirty brushes against the front of the slop sink. Blue water is spilling from her nimble fingers. I think to myself, we have to walk back into the classroom together, all steamy and damp. Did Brickman know this when he sent her out to help? By the 7th grade, it was clear to me that I was not scholastically or scientifically inclined. I began casting about for a career in a field that I was good at. Learning to be a commercial artist seemed like an area for me to explore, so I attended the High School of Art and Design. I studied illustration and advertising art. There was an inherent contradiction in this plan. I was cynical of the industry that tried to seduce people into buying things they would not have considered buying without the seduction. Though I struggled with this social issue, I was inspired by my graphic design teacher who said, "Notice the handsome white space in this design," as she held up a standard for us to aspire to. Illustration seemed more consistent with my basic goals. But so began my professional adulteration as a commercial artist. I also became intimate with the faces and attitudes of people while riding the train. The summer after high school, I enrolled in the Art Students League in Woodstock and was drawn into a magical world, hanging out with artists, staying out late drinking beer, sleeping in the woods, and crawling into class to draw pretty models. The situation and my teacher, Arnold Blanche, gave me permission to shed inhibitions in my life and in my drawing. Arnold offered me a scholarship for next summer. My artistic adulteration continued through the winter at Cooper Union. Guathme was a playful teacher, but he focused on anatomy, and Beckman required meticulous rendering. During the winter of 63-64, I spent a lot of time on the subway. The city provided me an endless stream of strangers and their attitudes. No one ever objected to me drawing them. When I returned to Woodstock for my scholarship the following summer, Arnold was noticeably disappointed with the control and skill I had acquired from my year at Cooper Union. "What happened to your fire?" he said as he shook his head and handed me back my drawing pad. I had no stock in proving to my teacher that labored rendering was good, so I went back to loose and bold drawing, which seemed to please the teacher. The summer of '64 turned out to be as rewarding as any 18-year-old could hope for. Each night was a social event or dinner at someone's house. In addition to my scholarship at school, Arnold arranged for me to have free residence in Kuniyoshi's studio. The model at school modeled for me privately in my studio. I painted large landscapes, exhibited at the Artists Association, sold a triptych landscape for $300, and I had a one-man show of drawings in the center of town. It looked like my career was on its way. I was full of myself, and no one seemed to mind. At the end of the summer, I drove to New York City with Susie, the model I had been drawing all summer, and her husband Richie. A friend at school connected me with the sculptor Frederick Kiesler. I became his apprentice. The work paid my rent and modest eating. Kiesler was a frail man with strong opinions. He was associated with the environmental sculpture movement, and most well known for his design of the endless house, formed of curved walls without corners. His sculpture was large and fabricated with wire mesh and cement. I saved this drawing that Kiesler sketched for me in 1965. My job that day was to carve this image onto the inside of this shell. The shell is the belly of Bucephalus, the famous horse of Alexander the Great.
Between work and school, I often ate at a tiny storefront Jewish dairy on 2nd Avenue. The restaurant was always crowded with old men who the short order cooks knew by name. I imagined that Brecht or Gershwin were sitting down the counter. The cashier in the front took the orders and yelled them back. "One Yankee bean and pumpernickel with a schmear, man in the front." Without the discipline needed for lettering, I expected school to be a breeze. Candido mercilessly insisted on greater and greater attention to anatomy. He lambasted my drawings at every critique. I committed myself to learning what Candido was trying to teach. I never got an indication from him that I had learned anything. My painting teacher, Ippolito, was detached. The one thing I remember him telling me was that I was stingy with my paint. Yes, on my budget I was. I never considered asking my parents to buy my paint. Studying art was fun, but living by myself in New York City was not a Woodstock summer vacation. I was out of my parents' house for the rest of my life, and a lot of my attention was focused on supporting myself. I began to feel that learning more about drawing, painting, and sculpture would not lead to a viable career. In school, I was learning how to do what other artists knew how to do, but competence was not enough. I thought my drawings and paintings would sell themselves, but they did not. I wondered what else I needed to know, and I started writing. Hard shelves are on the hard jars of dry food looking out. In the street, the cars are hard with people looking out. It doesn't hurt. Am I getting hard? Can I meet the hard softly? Deep in a New York City winter, I yearned for a woman to live with. Though I was going out and enjoying the girls I was dating, I was a long way from finding someone who could live with me or who I could live with. This seemed to be as important as supporting myself, and perhaps there was a bit for me to learn. I adored women and girls. I fashioned my own ideal woman when I was 8. Later I struggled to reconcile between pure virtuous women and the lustful beastie women of the street. I drew women that charmed me. After finishing my second year at Cooper Union, I took a leave of absence. My idea was to tour rural America, where there were no artists. I would look for a woman who was compatible with me. I found my way to a commune in Vermont where a self-styled guru used peyote to induce hallucination. The moral imperative at the commune was to be reverent and subservient to children. Within this context and the idea of a summer adventure, I became intimate with Pat, a woman 13 years older than me who had a child, Tommy, 2.5 years old. With an axe I found in the woodshed, I began cutting balsa fir trees and building an A-frame. Pat was furnishing the house in her imagination as I raised the timbers of the A-frame. Our summer fantasy extended to a winter in Mexico. We worked on a children's story about a rejected donkey. My time with Pat was satisfying and educational, but it became much more complicated than the original fantasy promised. It took most of the next winter to financially reestablish her as she was before we met. Compared to my relationship with Pat, my third year at Cooper Union was incidental. But going to school helped me separate. In class, I did what I wanted and took what the teacher said with a grain of salt. That winter, I worked for David Weinrib, and we developed a technique for casting polyester resin. Wolf Kahn, my painting teacher, invited me on a 2-week painting session to work on a sculpture. He told me to be careful that I don't make furniture. That is where I met Deborah.